Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked room today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret?
Welcome to today's journey into the strange and uncanny. In this video, we'll be diving into 5 weird tales, a collection of eerie, mysterious stories that twist the ordinary into the extraordinary. From unsettling encounters to haunting mysteries, these tales are guaranteed to spark your imagination and send a shiver down your spine.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked room today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back?
The Crimson Weaver by R Murray Gilchrist. My master and I had wandered from our track and lost ourselves on the side of a great edge. It was a 2 days' journey from the valley of the willow brakes, and we had roamed aimlessly, eating at hollow echoing inns where grey-haired hostesses ministered, and sleeping side by side through the dewless midsummer nights on beds of fresh-gathered heather. Beyond a single-arched, wall-less bridge that crossed a brown stream whose waters leaped straight from the upland, we reached the domain of the Crimson Weaver. No sooner had we reached the keystone when a beldam, wrinkled as a walnut and bald as an egg, crept from a cabin of turf and osier and held out her hands in warning. "Enter not the domain of the Crimson Weaver," she shrieked. "One I loved entered. I am here to warn men. Behold, I was beautiful once." She tore her ragged smock apart and discovered the foulness of her bosom, where the heart pulsed behind a curtain of livid skin. My master drew money from his wallet and scattered it on the ground. "She is mad," he said. "The evil she hints cannot exist. There is no fiend." So we passed on, but the bridge-keeper took no heed of the coins. For a while we heard her bellowed sighs issuing from the openings of her den. Strangely enough, the tenor of our talk changed from the moment that we left the bridge. He had been telling me of the Platonists, but when our feet pressed the sun-dried grass, I was impelled to question him of love. It was the first time I had thought of the matter. "How does passion first touch a man's life?" I asked, laying my hand on his arm. His ruddy colour faded. He smiled wryly. "You divine what passes in my brain," he replied. "I also had begun to meditate, but I may not tell you. In my boyhood, I was scarce older than you at the time. I loved the true paragon. 'Twas sacrilege to speak of the birth of passion. Let it suffice that ere I tasted of wedlock, the woman died, and her death sealed for ever the door of that chamber of my heart. Yet, if one might see therein, there is an altar crowned with ever-burning tapers and with wreaths of unwithering asphodels." By this time we had reached the skirt of a yew forest, traversed in every direction by narrow paths. The air was moist and heavy, but ever and anon a light wind touched the tree-tops and bowed them, so that the pollen sank in golden veils to the ground. Everywhere we saw half-ruined fountains, satyrs vomiting senilely, nymphs emptying wine upon the lambent flames of dying phoenixes, creatures that were neither satyrs nor nymphs, nor griffins, but grotesque adminglings of all, slain by one another, with water gushing from wounds in belly and thigh. At length the path we had chosen terminated beside an oval mere that was surrounded by a colonnade of moss-grown arches. Huge pike quivered on the muddy bed. Crayfish moved sluggishly among the weeds. There was an island in the middle, where a leaden Diana, more compassionate than a crocodile, caressed Actaeon's horns ere delivering him to his hounds. The huntress's head and shoulders were white with the excrement of a crowd of culvers that moved as if entangled in a snare. Northwards, an avenue rose for the space of a mile to fall abruptly before an azure sky. For many years, the yew-mast on the pathway had been undisturbed by human foot. It was covered with a crust of greenish lichen. My master pressed my fingers. "There is some evil in the air of this place," he said. "I am strong, but you may not endure. We will return." "'Tis an enchanted country," I made answer feverishly. "At the end of yonder avenue stands the palace of the sleeping maiden who awaits the kiss. Nay, since we have pierced the country thus far, let us not draw back. You are strong, master. No evil can touch us." So we fared to the place where the avenue sank, and then our eyes fell on the wondrous sight of a palace lying in a concave pleasaunce, all treeless, but so bestarred with fainting flowers that neither blade of grass nor grain of earth was visible. Then came a rustling of wings above our heads, and looking skywards I saw flying towards the house a flock of culvers like unto those that had drawn themselves over Diana's head. The hindmost bird dropped its neck, and behold, it gazed upon us with the face of a mannequin. "They are charmed birds, made thus by the whim of the princess," I said. As the birds passed through the portals of a columbary that crowned the western tower, their white wings beat against the silver bell that glistened there, and the whole valley was filled with music. My master trembled and crossed himself. "In the name of our mother," he exclaimed, "let us return. I dare not trust your life here." But a great door in front of the palace swung open, and a woman with a swaying walk came out to the terrace. She wore a robe of crimson worn into tatters at skirt hem and shoulders. She had been forewarned of our presence, for her face turned instantly in our direction. She smiled subtly, and her smile died away into a most tempting sadness. She caught up such remnants of her skirt as trailed behind, and strutted about with the gait of a peacock. As the sun touched the glossy fabric, I saw eyes inwrought in deeper hue. My master still trembled, but he did not move, for the gaze of the woman was fixed upon him. His brows twisted, and his white hair rose and stood erect, as if he viewed some unspeakable horror. Stooping, with sidelong motions of the head, she approached, bringing with her the smell of such an incense as when amidst eastern herbs burns the corse. She was perfect of feature as the Diana, but her skin was deathly white, and her lips fretted with pain. She took no heed of me, but knelt at my master's feet, a Magdalene before an impregnable priest. "Prince and lord, tower of chastity, hear," she murmured. "For lack of love I perish. See, my robe in tatters." He strove to avert his face, but his eyes still dwelt upon her. She half rose and shook nut-brown tresses over his knees. Youth came back in a flood to my master. His shriveled skin filled out, the dying sunlight turned to gold the whiteness of his hair. He would have raised her had I not caught his hands. The anguish of foreboding made me cry, "One forces roughly the door of your heart's chamber. The wreaths wither, the tapers bend and fall." He grew old again. The crimson weaver turned to me. "O marplot," she said laughingly, "think not to vanquish me with folly. I am too powerful. Once that a man enter my doom, he is mine." But I drew my master away. "'Tis I who am strong," I whispered. "We will go hence at once. Surely we may find our way back to the bridge. The journey is easy." The woman, seeing that the remembrance of an old love was strong within him, sighed heavily and returned to the palace. As she reached the doorway, the valves opened, and I saw, in a distant chamber beyond the hall, an ivory loom with a golden stool. My master and I walked again on the track we had made in the yew-mast, but twilight was falling, and ere we could reach the pool of Diana, all was in utter darkness. So at the foot of a tree, where no ant-hill rose, we lay down and slept. Dreams came to me, gorgeous visions from the romances of eld. Everywhere I sought vainly for a beloved. There was the castle of the ebony dwarf, where a young queen reposed in the innermost casket of the 7th crystal cabinet. There was the chamber of gloom, where Leonore danced, and where I groped for ages around columns of living flesh. There was the white minaret, where 21 princesses poised themselves on balls of burnished bronze. There was Melisandre's arbour, where the sacred toads crawled over the enchanted cloak. Unrest fretted me. I woke in spiritual pain. Dawn was breaking, a bright yellow dawn, and the glades were full of vapours. I turned to the place where my master had lain. He was not there. I felt with my hands over his bed. It was key-cold. Terror of my loneliness overcame me, and I sat with covered face. On the ground near my feet lay a broken riband, whereon was strung a heart of chrysolite. It enclosed a knot of ash-coloured hair, hair of the girl my master had loved. The mists gathered together and passed sunwards in one long, many-covered veil. When the last shred had been drawn into the great light, I gazed along the avenue and saw the topmost bartizan of the Crimson Weaver's palace. It was midday ere I dared start on my search. The culvers beat about my head. I walked in pain as though giant spiders had woven about my body. On the terrace, strange beasts, dogs and pigs with human limbs, tore ravenously at something that lay beside the balustrade. At sight of me they paused and lifted their snouts and bayed. A while afterwards the culvers rang the silver bell, and the monsters dispersed hurriedly amongst the drooping blossoms of the pleasaunce, and where they had swarmed, I saw naught but a steaming, sanguine pool. I approached the house, and the door fell open, admitting me to a chamber adorned with embellishments beyond the witchery of art. There I lifted my voice and cried eagerly, "My master! My master! Where is my master?" The alcove sent out a babble of echoes blended together like a harp chord on a dulcimer. "My master, where is my master? For the love of Christ, where is my master?" The echo replied only, "Where is my master?" Above swung a globe of topaz, where 100 suns gambolled. From its centre a convoluted horn held by a crimson cord sank lower and lower. It stayed before my lips, and I blew therein, and heard the sweet voices of youth chant with one accord. "Fall open, O doors! Fall open and show the way to the princess." Ere the last of the echoes had died, a vista opened, and at the end of an alabaster gallery I saw the Crimson Weaver at her loom. She had doffed her tattered robe for one new and lustrous as freshly drawn blood, and marvellous as her beauty had seemed before, its wonder was now increased 100-fold. She came towards me with the same stately walk, but there was now a lightness in her demeanour that suggested the growth of wings. Within arm's length she curtsied, and curtsying showed me the firmness of her shoulders, the fullness of her breast. The sight brought no pleasure. My cracking tongue appealed in agony. "My master! Where is my master?" She smiled happily. "Nay, do not trouble. He is not here. His soul talks with the culvers in the cote. He has forgotten you. In the night we supped, and I gave him of Nepenthe." "Where is my master?" "Yesterday he told me of the shrine in his heart, of ever-fresh flowers, of a love dead yet living." Her eyebrows curved mirthfully. "'Tis foolish boys' talk," she said. If you sought till the end of time, you'd never find him, unless I choose. Yet, if you buy of me, myself to name the price. I looked around hopelessly at the unimaginable riches of her home. All that I have is this manor of the willow brakes, a moorish park, an ancient house where the thatch gapes and the casements swing loose. My possessions are pitiable, I said, but they are all yours. I give all to save him. Fool, fool, she cried, I have no need of gear. If I but raise my hand, all the riches of the world fall to me. 'Tis not what I wish for. Into her eyes came such a glitter as the moon makes on the moist skin of a sleeping snake. The firmness of her lips relaxed. They grew childlike in their softness. The atmosphere became almost tangible. I could scarce breathe. What is it? All that I can do, if it be no sin? Come with me to my loom, she said, and if you do the thing I desire, you shall see him. There's no evil in't. In past times, kings have sighed for the same. So I followed slowly to the loom before which she had seated herself, and watched her deftly passing crimson thread over crimson thread. She was silent for a space, and in that space her beauty fascinated me, so that I was no longer master of myself. What you wish for I will give, even if it be life. The loom ceased. A kiss of the mouth, and you shall see him who passed in the night. She clasped her arms about my neck and pressed my lips. For one moment heaven and earth ceased to be. But there was one paradise, where we were sole governors. Then she moved back and drew aside the web and showed me the head of my master and the bleeding heart, whence a crimson cord unravelled into many threads. I wear men's lives, the woman said. Life is necessary to me, or even I, who have existed from the beginning, must die. But yesterday I feared the end, and he came. His soul is not dead. 'Tis truth that it plays with my culvers. I fell back. Another kiss, she said. Unless I wish, there is no escape for you. Yet you may return to your home, though my power over you shall never wane. Once more, lip to lip. I crouched against the wall like a terrified dog. She grew angry. Her eyes darted fire. A kiss, she cried, for the penalty. My poor master's head, ugly and cadaverous, glared from the loom. I could not move. The crimson weaver lifted her skirt, uncovering feet shapen as those of a vulture. I fell prostrate. With her claws she fumbled about the flesh of my breast. Moving away, she bade me pass from her sight. So, half dead, I lie here at the manor of the willow brakes, watching hour by hour the bloody clue ever unwinding from my heart and passing over the western hills to the palace of the siren.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead?
The Quest of Iranon by H P Lovecraft. Into the granite city of Teloth wandered the youth, vine-crowned, his yellow hair glistening with myrrh, and his purple robe torn with briars of the mountain Sidrak that lies across the antique bridge of stone. The men of Teloth are dark and stern, and dwell in square houses, and with frowns they asked the stranger whence he had come, and what were his name and fortune. So the youth answered, I am Iranon, and I come from Ira, a far city that I recall only dimly but seek to find again. I am a singer of songs that I learned in the far city, and my calling is to make beauty with the things remembered of childhood. My wealth is in little memories and dreams, and in hopes that I sing in gardens when the moon is tender and the west wind stirs the lotus buds. When the men of Teloth heard these things, they whispered to one another, for though in the granite city there is no laughter or song, the stern men sometimes look to the Carthian hills in the spring and think of the lutes of distant Unai, whereof travellers have told. And thinking thus, they bade the stranger stay and sing in the square before the tower of Mlin, though they liked not the colour of his tattered robe, nor the myrrh in his hair, nor his chaplet of vine leaves, nor the youth in his golden voice. At evening Iranon sang, and while he sang an old man prayed, and a blind man said he saw a nimbus over the singer's head. But most of the men of Teloth yawned, and some laughed, and some went to sleep, for Iranon told nothing useful, singing only his memories, his dreams, and his hopes. I remember the twilight, the moon, the soft songs, and the window where I was rocked to sleep, and through the window was the street where the golden lights came, and where the shadows danced on houses of marble. I remember the square of moonlight on the floor that was not like any other light, and the visions that danced in the moonbeams when my mother sang to me. And too, I remember the sun of morning bright above the many-coloured hills in summer, and the sweetness of flowers born on the south wind that made the trees sing. O Ira, city of marble and beryl, how many are thy beauties! How loved I the warm and fragrant groves across the Hyaline Nithra, and the falls of the tiny Kra that flowed through the verdant valley. In those groves and in that vale the children wove wreaths for one another, and at dusk I dreamed strange dreams under the yath trees on the mountain, as I saw below me the lights of the city and the curving Nithra reflecting a ribbon of stars. And in the city were palaces of veined and tinted marble, with golden domes and painted walls, and green gardens with cerulean pools and crystal fountains. Often I played in the gardens and waded in the pools, and lay and dreamed among the pale flowers under the trees. And sometimes at sunset I would climb the long hilly street to the citadel and the open place, and look down upon Ira, the magic city of marble and beryl, splendid in a robe of golden flame. Long have I missed thee, Ira, for I was but young when we went into exile, but my father was thy king, and I shall come again to thee, for it is so decreed of fate. All through 7 lands have I sought thee, and some day shall I reign over thy groves and gardens, thy streets and palaces, and sing to men who shall know whereof I sing, and laugh not, nor turn away. For I am Iranon, who was a prince in Ira. That night the men of Teloth lodged the stranger in a stable, and in the morning an Archon came to him and told him to go to the shop of Athok the cobbler and be apprenticed to him. But I am Iranon, a singer of songs, he said, and have no heart for the cobbler's trade. All in Teloth must toil, replied the Archon, for that is the law. Then said Iranon, wherefore do ye toil? Is it not that ye may live and be happy? And if ye toil only that ye may toil more, when shall happiness find you? Ye toil to live, but is not life made of beauty and song? And if ye suffer no singers among you, where shall be the fruits of your toil? Toil without songs is like a weary journey without an end. were not death more pleasing? But the Archon was sullen, and did not understand, and rebuked the stranger. Thou art a strange youth, and I like not thy face nor thy voice. The words thou speakest are blasphemy, for the gods of Teloth have said that toil is good. Our gods have promised us a haven of light beyond death, where there shall be rest without end, and crystal coldness amidst which none shall vex his mind with thought, or his eyes with beauty. Go thou then to Athok the cobbler, or be gone out of the city by sunset. All here must serve, and song is folly. So Iranon went out of the stable and walked over the narrow stone streets between the gloomy square houses of granite, seeking something green in the air of spring. But in Teloth was nothing green, for all was of stone. On the faces of men were frowns, but by the stone embankment along the sluggish river Zuro sate a young boy with sad eyes, gazing into the waters to spy green budding branches washed down from the hills by the freshets. And the boy said to him, Art thou not indeed he of whom the Archons tell, who seekest a far city in a fair land? I am Romnod, and born of the blood of Teloth, but I am not old in the ways of the granite city, and yearn daily for the warm groves and the distant lands of beauty and song. Beyond the Carthian hills lieth Unai, the city of lutes and dancing, which men whisper of and say is both lovely and terrible. Thither would I go, were I old enough to find the way, and thither shouldst thou go, and thou wouldst sing and have men listen to thee. Let us leave the city, Teloth, and fare together among the hills of spring. Thou shalt show me the ways of travel, and I will attend thy songs at evening, when the stars one by one bring dreams to the minds of dreamers. And peradventure it may be that Unai, the city of lutes and dancing, is even the fair Ira thou seekest. For it is told that thou hast not known Ira since old days, and the name often changeth. Let us go to Unai, O Iranon of the golden head, where men shall know our longings and welcome us as brothers, nor ever laugh or frown at what we say. And Iranon answered, Be it so, small one. If any in this stone place yearn for beauty, he must seek the mountains and beyond, and I would not leave thee to pine by the sluggish Zuro. But think not that delight and understanding dwell just across the Carthian hills, or in any spot thou canst find in a day's or a year's or a lustrum's journey. Behold, when I was small like thee, I dwelt in the valley of Narthos by the frigid Tsari, where none would listen to my dreams, and I told myself that when older I would go to Sinara on the southern slope and sing to smiling dromedary men in the marketplace. But when I went to Sinara, I found the dromedary men all drunken and ribald, and saw that their songs were not as mine. So I travelled in a barge down the Tsari to onyx-walled Jaren, and the soldiers at Jaren laughed at me and drave me out, so that I wandered to many other cities. I have seen Stethilos, that is below the great cataract, and have gazed on the marsh where Sarnath once stood. I have been to Thra, Ilarnek, and Cadatheron on the winding river Ai, and have dwelt long in Alathoe in the land of Lomar. But though I have had listeners sometimes, they have been ever few, and I know that welcome shall await me only in Ira, the city of marble and beryl, where my father once ruled as king. So for Ira shall we seek, though it were well to visit distant and lute-blessed Unai across the Carthian hills, which may indeed be Ira, though I think not. Ira's beauty is past imagining, and none can tell of it without rapture, whilst of Unai the camel-drivers whisper leeringly. At the sunset, Iranon and small Romnod went forth from Teloth, and for long wandered amidst the green hills and cool forests. The way was rough and obscure, and never did they seem nearer to Unai, the city of lutes and dancing. But in the dusk, as the stars came out, Iranon would sing of Ira and its beauties, and Romnod would listen, so that they were both happy, after a fashion. They ate plentifully of fruit and red berries, and marked not the passing of time. But many years must have slipped away. Small Romnod was not now so small, and spoke deeply instead of shrilly, though Iranon was always the same, and decked his golden hair with vines and fragrant resins found in the woods. So it came to pass one day that Romnod seemed older than Iranon, though he had been very small when Iranon had found him watching for green budding branches in Teloff, beside the sluggish stone-banked Zuro. Then, one night, when the moon was full, the travellers came to a mountain crest and looked down upon the myriad lights of Unai. Peasants had told them they were near, and Iranon knew that this was not his native city of Ira. The lights of Unai were not like those of Ira, for they were harsh and glaring, while the lights of Ira shine as softly and magically as shone the moonlight on the floor of the window where Iranon's mother once rocked him to sleep with song. But Unai was a city of lutes and dancing, so Iranon and Romnod went down the steep slope that they might find men to whom songs and dreams would bring pleasure. And when they were coming into the town, they found rose-wreathed revellers bound from house to house and leaning from windows and balconies, who listened to the songs of Iranon and tossed him flowers and applauded when he was done. Then, for a moment, did Iranon believe he had found those who thought and felt even as he, though the town was not 100th as fair as Ira. When came, Iranon looked about with dismay, for the domes of Unai were not golden in the sun, but grey and dismal, and the men of Unai were pale with revelling and dull with wine, and unlike the radiant men of Ira. But because the people had thrown him blossoms and acclaimed his songs, Iranon stayed on, and with him Romnod, who liked the revelry of the town and wore in his dark hair roses and myrtle. Often at night Iranon sang to the revellers, but he was always as before, crowned only with the vine of the mountains and remembering the marble streets of Ira and the hyaline Nithra. In the frescoed halls of the monarch did he sing, upon a crystal dais raised over a floor that was a mirror, and as he sang he brought pictures to his hearers till the floor seemed to reflect old, beautiful, and half-remembered things, instead of the wine-reddened feasters who pelted him with roses. And the king bade him put away his tattered purple, and clothed him in satin and cloth of gold, with rings of green jade, and bracelets of tinted ivory, and lodged him in a gilded and tapestried chamber, on a bed of sweet carven wood, with canopies and coverlets of flower-embroidered silk. Thus dwelt Iranon in Unai, the city of lutes and dancing. It is not known how long Iranon tarried in Unai, but one day the king brought to the palace some wild whirling dancers from the Lyranian desert and dusky flute players from Drinen in the east. And after that, the revellers threw their roses not so much at Iranon as at the dancers and the flute players. And day by day, that Romnod, who had been a small boy in granite Teloff, grew coarser and redder with wine, till he dreamed less and less, and listened with less delight to the songs of Iranon. But though Iranon was sad, he ceased not to sing, and at evening told again his dreams of Ira, the city of marble and beryl. Then, one night, the red and fattened Romnod snorted heavily amidst the poppied silks of his banquet couch, and died writhing, whilst Iranon, pale and slender, sang to himself in a far corner. And when Iranon had wept over the grave of Romnod, and strewn it with green budding branches, such as Romnod used to love, he put aside his silks and gauds, and went forgotten out of Unai, the city of lutes, and dancing clad only in the ragged purple in which he had come, and garlanded with fresh vines from the mountains. Into the sunset wandered Iranon, seeking still for his native land, and for men who would understand and cherish his songs and dreams. In all the cities of Sidathria, and in the lands beyond the Manachik desert, gay-faced children laughed at his olden songs and tattered robe of purple. But Iranon stayed ever young, and wore wreaths upon his golden head, whilst he sang of Ira, delight of the past, and hope of the future. So came he one night to the squalid cot of an antique shepherd, bent and dirty, who kept lean flocks on a stony slope above a quicksand marsh. To this man Iranon spoke, as to so many others. Canst thou tell me where I may find Ira, the city of marble and beryl, where flows the Hyaline Nithra, and where the falls of the tiny Kra sing to verdant valleys and hills forested with yath trees? And the shepherd, hearing, looked long and strangely at Iranon, as if recalling something very far away in time, and noted each line of the stranger's face, and his golden hair, and his crown of vine leaves. But he was old, and shook his head as he replied, "O stranger, I have indeed heard the name of Ira, and the other names thou hast spoken, but they come to me from afar down the waste of long years. I heard them in my youth from the lips of a playmate, a beggar's boy given to strange dreams, who would weave long tales about the moon and the flowers and the west wind. We used to laugh at him, for we knew him from his birth, though he thought himself a king's son. He was comely, even as thou, but full of folly and strangeness, and he ran away when small to find those who would listen gladly to his songs and dreams. How often hath he sung to me of lands that never were, and things that never can be. Of Ira did he speak much, of Ira and the river Nithra, and the falls of the tiny Kra. There would he ever say he once dwelt as a prince, though we here knew him from his birth. Nor was there ever a marble city of Ira, nor those who could delight in strange songs, save in the dreams of mine old playmate Iranon, who is gone. And in the twilight, as the stars came out one by one, and the moon cast on the marsh a radiance like that which a child sees quivering on the floor as he is rocked to sleep at evening, there walked into the lethal quicksands a very old man in tattered purple, crowned with withered vine leaves, and gazing ahead as if upon the golden domes of a fair city where dreams are understood. That night, something of youth and beauty died in the elder world.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
The Yellow Sign by Robert W. Chambers. Let the red dawn surmise what we shall do when this blue starlight dies and all is through. There are so many things which are impossible to explain. Why should certain chords in music make me think of the brown and golden tints of autumn foliage? Why should the Mass of Saint Cecile send my thoughts wandering among caverns whose walls blaze with ragged masses of virgin silver? What was it in the roar and turmoil of Broadway at 6 o'clock that flashed before my eyes the picture of a still Breton forest where sunlight filtered through spring foliage, and Sylvia bent half curiously, half tenderly, over a small green lizard, murmuring, "To think this is also a little ward of God." When I first saw the watchman, his back was toward me. I looked at him indifferently until he went into the church. I paid no more attention to him than I had to any other man who lounged through Washington Square that morning. And when I shut my window and turned back into my studio, I had forgotten him. Late in the afternoon, the day being warm, I raised the window again and leaned out to get a sniff of air. The man was standing in the courtyard of the church, and I noticed him again with as little interest as I had that morning. I looked across the square to where the fountain was playing, and then, with my mind filled with vague impressions of trees, asphalt drives, and the moving groups of nursemaids and holiday-makers, I started to walk back to my easel. As I turned, my listless glance included the man below in the churchyard. His face was toward me now, and with a perfectly involuntary movement, I bent to see it. At the same time, he raised his head and looked at me. Instantly, I thought of a coffin worm. Whatever it was about the man that repelled me, I do not know, but the impression of a plump, white grave worm was so intense and nauseating that I must have shown it in my expression, for he turned his puffy face away with a movement which made me think of a disturbed grub in a chestnut. I went back to my easel and motioned the model to resume her pose. After working a while, I was satisfied I was spoiling what I had done as rapidly as possible, and I took up a palette knife and scraped the color out again. The flesh tones were sallow and unhealthy, and I did not understand how I could have painted such sickly color into a study, which before that had glowed with healthy tones. I looked at Tessie. She had not changed, and the clear flush of health dyed her neck and cheeks as I frowned. "Is it something I've done?" she said. "No, I've made a mess of this arm, and for the life of me I can't see how I came to paint such mud as that into the canvas," I replied. "Didn't I pose well?" she insisted. "Of course, perfectly." "Then it's not my fault." "No, it's my own." "I'm very sorry," she said. I told her she could rest while I applied rag and turpentine to the plague spot on my canvas, and she went off to smoke a cigarette and look over the illustrations in the Courrier Français. I did not know whether it was something in the turpentine or a defect in the canvas, but the more I scrubbed, the more the gangrene seemed to spread. I worked like a beaver to get it out, and yet the disease appeared to creep from limb to limb of the study before me. Alarmed, I strove to arrest it, but now the color on the breast changed, and the whole figure seemed to absorb the infection as a sponge soaks up water. Vigorously I applied palette knife, turpentine, and scraper, thinking all the time what a séance I should hold with Duval, who had sold me the canvas. But soon I noticed that it was not the canvas which was defective, nor yet the colors of Edward. It must be the turpentine, I thought angrily, or else my eyes have become so blurred and confused by the afternoon light that I can't see straight. I called Tessie the model. She came and leaned over my chair, blowing rings of smoke into the air. "What have you been doing to it?" she exclaimed. "Nothing," I growled. "It must be this turpentine." "What a horrible color it is now," she continued. "Do you think my flesh resembles green cheese?" "No, I don't," I said angrily. "Did you ever know me to paint like that before?" "No, indeed." "Well, then, it must be the turpentine or something," she admitted. She slipped on a Japanese robe and walked to the window. I scraped and rubbed until I was tired and finally picked up my brushes and hurled them through the canvas with a forcible expression, the tone alone of which reached Tessie's ears. Nevertheless, she promptly began, "That's it. Swear and act silly and ruin your brushes. You've been 3 weeks on that study, and now look. What's the good of ripping the canvas? What creatures artists are." I felt about as much ashamed as I usually did after such an outbreak, and I turned the ruined canvas to the wall. Tessie helped me clean my brushes and then danced away to dress. From the screen she regaled me with bits of advice concerning whole or partial loss of temper until, thinking perhaps I had been tormented sufficiently, she came out to implore me to button her waist where she could not reach it on the shoulder. "Everything went wrong from the time you came back from the window and talked about that horrid-looking man you saw in the churchyard," she announced. "Yes, he probably bewitched the picture," I said, yawning. I looked at my watch. "It's after 6, I know," said Tessie, adjusting her hat before the mirror. "Yes," I replied. "I didn't mean to keep you so long." I leaned out the window, but recoiled with disgust, for the young man with the pasty face stood below in the churchyard. Tessie saw my gesture of disapproval and leaned from the window. "Is that the man you don't like?" she whispered. I nodded. "I can't see his face, but he does look fat and soft. Some way or other," she continued, turning to look at me, "he reminds me of a dream. An awful dream I once had, or," she mused, looking down at her shapely shoes, "was it a dream after all?" "How should I know?" I smiled. Tessie smiled in reply. "You were in it," she said, "so perhaps you might know something about it." Tessie, I protested. "Don't you dare flatter by saying that you dream about me." "But I did," she insisted. "Shall I tell you about it?" "Go ahead," I replied, lighting a cigarette. Tessie leaned back on the open windowsill and began very seriously. "One night last winter I was lying in bed, thinking about nothing at all in particular. I had been posing for you, and I was tired out, yet it seemed impossible for me to sleep. I heard the bells in the city ring 10, 11 at midnight. I must have fallen asleep about midnight because I don't remember hearing the bells after that. It seemed to me that I had scarcely closed my eyes when I dreamed that something impelled me to go to the window. I rose and, raising the sash, leaned out. 25th Street was deserted as far as I could see. I began to be afraid. Everything outside seemed so black and uncomfortable. Then the sound of wheels in the distance came to my ears, and it seemed to me as though that was what I must wait for. Very slowly the wheels approached, and finally I could make out a vehicle moving along the street. It came nearer and nearer, and when it passed beneath my window, I saw it was a hearse. Then, as I trembled with fear, the driver turned and looked straight at me. When I awoke, I was standing by the open window, shivering with cold, but the black-plumed hearse and the driver were gone. I dreamed this dream again in March last, and again woke beside the open window. Last night, the dream came again. You remember how it was raining? When I awoke, standing at the open window, my nightdress was soaked. "But where did I come into the dream?" I asked. You were in the coffin. But you were not dead." "In the coffin?" "Yes." "How did you know? Could you see me?" "No, I only knew you were there." "Had you been eating Welsh rarebits or lobster salad?" I began laughing, but the girl interrupted me with a frightened cry. "Hello? What's up?" I said as she shrank into the embrasure by the window. The man below in the churchyard. He drove the hearse." "Nonsense," I said, but Tessie's eyes were wide with terror. I went to the window and looked out. The man was gone. "Calm, Tessie," I urged. "Don't be foolish. You've posed too long. You're nervous." "Do you think I could forget that face?" she murmured. 3 times I saw the hearse pass below my window, and every time the driver turned and looked up at me. Oh, his face was so white and soft. It looked dead. It looked as if it had been dead a long time." I induced the girl to sit down and swallow a glass of marsala. Then I sat down beside her and tried to give her some advice. "Look here, Tessie," I said. "You go to the country for a week or 2, and you'll have no more dreams about hearses. You pose all day, and when night comes, your nerves are upset. You can't keep this up. Then again, instead of going to bed when your day's work's done, you run off to picnics at Sulzer's Park, or go to the El Dorado or Coney Island, and when you come here the next morning, you've fagged out. There was no real hearse. That was a soft-shell crab dream." She smiled faintly. "What about the man in the churchyard?" "Oh, he's only an ordinary, unhealthy, everyday creature. As true as my name is Tessie Reardon, I swear to you, Mr. Scott, that the face of the man below in the churchyard is the face of the man who drove the hearse." "What of it?" I said. "It's an honest trade." "Then you think I did see the hearse?" "Oh," I said diplomatically, "if you really did, it might not be unlikely that the man below drove it. There's nothing in that." Tessie rose and rolled a scented handkerchief, and taking a bit of gum from a knot in the hem, placed it in her mouth. Then, drawing on her gloves, she offered me her hand with a frank "Good night, Mr. Scott," and walked out. 2. The next morning, Thomas the bellboy brought me the Herald and a bit of news. The church next door had been sold. I thanked heaven for it. Not that it being Catholic, I had any repugnance for the congregation next door, but because my nerves were shattered by the blatant exhorter.
whose every word echoed through the aisle of the church as if it had been my own rooms, and who insisted on his R's with a nasal persistence which revolted my every instinct. Then, too, there was a fiend in human shape, the organist, who reeled off some grand old hymns with an interpretation of his own, and I longed for the blood of a creature who could play the doxology with an amendment of minor chords, which one only hears in the quarter of very young undergraduates. I believe the minister was a good man, but when he bellowed, "And the Lord said unto Moses, the Lord is a man of war, the Lord is his name, no wrath shall wax hot, and I will kill you with the sword," I wondered how many centuries of purgatory it would take to atone for such a sin. "Who bought the property?" I asked. "Nobody that I know, sir. They do say a gent what owns this here Hamilton Flats was looking at it. He might be a-building more studios." I walked to the window. The young man with the unhealthy face stood by the churchyard gate, and at the mere sight of him the same overwhelming repugnance took possession of me. "By the way, Thomas," I said, "who is that fellow down there?" Thomas sniffed. "That there worm, sir. He's night watchman of the church, sir. He makes me tired sitting out all night in them steps and looking at you insulting like. I punched his head, sir. Beg pardon, sir." "Go on, Thomas." "One night, coming home with Harry, the other English boy, I sees him sitting there on them steps. We had Molly and Jen with us, sir, the two girls on the tray service, and he looked so insulting at us that I up and says, 'What are you looking at, you fat slug?' Beg pardon, sir, but that's how I says, sir. Then he don't say nothing, and I says, 'Come out and I'll punch your pudding head.' Then I opens the gate and goes in, but he don't say nothing, only looks insulting like. Then I hits him one, but his head was that cold and mushy, it'd sicken you to touch him." "What did he do then?" I asked cautiously. "Him? Nothing." "And you, Thomas?" The young fellow flushed with embarrassment and smiled uneasily. "Mr. Scott, sir, I ain't no coward, and I can't make it out at all why I run. I was in the 5th Lancers, sir, bugler at Tel El Kabir, and was shot by the Wells." "You don't mean to say you ran away?" "Yes, sir, I run." "Why?" "That's just what I want to know, sir. I grabbed Molly and run, and the rest was as frightened as I." "But what were they frightened at?" Thomas refused to answer for a while, but now my curiosity was aroused about the repulsive young man below, and I pressed him. 3 years' sojourn in America had not only modified Thomas's Cockney dialect, but had given him the American's fear of ridicule. "You won't believe me, Mr. Scott, sir." "Yes, I will." "You laugh at me, sir." "Nonsense." He hesitated. "Well, sir, it's God's truth that when I hit him, he grabbed my wrist, sir, and when I twisted his soft, mushy fist, one of his fingers come off in my hand." The utter loathing and horror on Thomas's face must have been reflected in my own, for he added, "It's awful, and now when I see him, I just go away. He makes me ill." When Thomas had gone, I went to the window. The man stood beside the church railing with both hands on the gate, but I hastily retreated to my easel again, sickened and horrified, for I saw that the middle finger of his right hand was missing. At 9 o'clock, Tessie appeared and vanished behind the screen with a merry, "Good morning, Mr. Scott." When she had reappeared and taken repose upon the model stand, I started a new canvas, much to her delight. She remained silent as long as I was on the drawing, but as soon as the scrape of the charcoal ceased and I took up my fixative, she began to chatter. "Oh, I had such a lovely time last night. We went to Tony Pastor's." "Who are we?" I demanded. "Oh, Maggie, you know, Mr. White's model, and Pinky McCormick. We call her Pinky 'cause she's got that beautiful red hair you artists like so much. And Lizzie Burke." I sent a shower of spray from the fixative over the canvas and said, "Well, go on." "We saw Kelly and Baby Barnes, a skirt dancer, and all the rest. I made a mash." "Then you've gone back on me, Tessie." She laughed and shook her head. "He's Lizzie Burke's brother, Ed. He's a perfect gentleman." I felt constrained to give her some parental advice concerning mashing, which she took with a bright smile. "Oh, I can take care of a strange mash," she said, examining her chewing gum. "But Ed's different. Lizzie is my best friend." Then she related how Ed had come back from the stocking mill in Lowell, Massachusetts, to find her and Lizzie grown, and what an accomplished young man he was, and how he thought nothing of squandering $50 for ice cream and oysters to celebrate his entry as clerk into the woolen department of Macy's. Before she finished, I began to paint, and she resumed the pose, smiling and chattering like a sparrow. By noon, I had the study fairly well rubbed in, and Tessie came to look at it. "That's better," she said. I thought so too, and ate my lunch with a satisfied feeling that all was going well. Tessie spread her lunch on a drawing table opposite me, and we drank our claret from the same bottle and lighted our cigarettes from the same match. I was very much attached to Tessie. I had watched her shoot up into a slender but exquisitely formed woman from a frail, awkward child. She had posed for me during the last 3 years, and among all my models, she was my favorite. It would have troubled me very much indeed had she become tough, or fly, as the phrase goes. But I never noticed any deterioration of her manner and felt at heart that she was all right. She and I never discussed morals at all, and I had no intention of doing so, partly because I had none myself, and partly because I knew she'd do what she liked in spite of me. Still, I did hope she would steer clear of complications because I wished her well, and then also I had a selfish desire to retain the best model I had. I knew that mashing, as she termed it, had no significance with girls like Tessie, and that such things in America did not resemble in the least the same things in Paris. Yet, having lived with my eyes open, I also knew that somebody would take Tessie away some day, in one manner or another. And though I professed to myself that marriage was nonsense, I sincerely hoped that in this case there would be a priest at the end of the vista. I am a Catholic. When I listen to High Mass, when I sign myself, I feel that everything, including myself, is more cheerful, and when I confess, it does me good. A man who lives as much alone as I do must confess to somebody. Then again, Sylvia was Catholic, and it was reason enough for me. But I was speaking of Tessie, which is very different. Tessie was also Catholic, and much more devout than I. So, taking all in all, I had little fear for my pretty model until she should fall in love. But then I knew that fate alone would decide her future for her, and I prayed inwardly that fate would keep her away from men like me and throw into the path nothing but Ed Burke's and Jimmy McCormick's, bless her sweet face. Tessie sat blowing rings of smoke up to the ceiling and tinkling the ice in her tumbler. "Do you know that I also had a dream last night?" I observed. "Not about that man," she laughed. "Exactly. A dream similar to yours, only much worse." It was foolish and thoughtless of me to say this, but you know how little tact the average painter has. "I must have fallen asleep about 10 o'clock, I continued, and after a while I dreamt that I awoke, so plainly that I hear the midnight bells, the wind in the tree branches, and the whistle of steamers from the bay, that even now I can scarcely believe I wasn't awake. I seemed to be lying in a box which had a glass cover. Dimly I saw the street lamps as I passed, for I must tell you, Tessie, the box in which I reclined appeared to lie on a cushioned wagon, which jolted me over a stony pavement. After a while I became impatient and tried to move, but the box was too narrow. My hands were crossed on my breast, so I couldn't raise them to help myself. I listened and then tried to call. My voice was gone. I could hear the trample of the horses attached to the wagon and even the breathing of the driver. Then another sound broke upon my ears like the raising of a window sash. I managed to turn my head a little and found I could look, not only through the glass cover of my box, but also through the glass panes in the side of the covered vehicle. I saw houses, empty and silent, with neither light nor life about any of them excepting one. In that house a window was open on the first floor, and a figure, all in white, stood looking down into the street. It was you. Tessie had turned her face away from me and leaned on the table with her elbow. "I could see your face," I resumed, "and it seemed to me to be very sorrowful. Then we passed on and turned into a narrow black lane. Presently the horses stopped. I waited and waited, closing my eyes with fear and impatience, but all was silent as the grave. After what seemed to me hours, I began to feel uncomfortable. The sense that somebody was close to me made me unclose my eyes. Then I saw the white face of the hearse driver looking at me through the coffin lid. A sob from Tessie interrupted me. She was trembling like a leaf. I saw I had made an ass of myself and attempted to repair the damage. "Why, Tess," I said, "I only told you this to show what influence your story might have on another person's dreams. You don't suppose I really lay in a coffin, do you? What are you trembling for? Don't you see that your dream and my unreasonable dislike for that inoffensive watchman of the church simply set my brain working as soon as I fell asleep. She laid her head between my arms and sobbed as if her heart would break. What a precious triple donkey I'd made of myself. But I was about to break my record. I went over and put my arm about her. "Tessie, dear, forgive me," I said. "I had no business to frighten you with such nonsense. You're too sensible a girl, too good a Catholic to believe in dreams." Her hand tightened on mine, and her head fell back upon my shoulder, but she still trembled, and I petted her and comforted her. "Come, Tess, open your eyes and smile." Her eyes opened with a slow, languid movement and met mine, but their expression was so queer that I hastened to reassure her again. "It's all humbug, Tessie. You surely aren't afraid that any harm will come to you because of that?" "No," she said, but her scarlet lips quivered. "Then what's the matter? Are you afraid?" "Yes." "Not for myself?" "For me, then?" I demanded gaily. "For you," she murmured in a voice almost inaudible. I care for you." At first I started to laugh, but when I understood her, a shock passed through me, and I sat like one turned to stone. This was the crowning bit of idiocy I had committed. During the moment which elapsed between her reply and my answer, I thought of 1,000 responses to that innocent confession. I could pass it by with a laugh. I could misunderstand her and reassure her as to my health. I could simply point out that it was impossible that she could love me. But my reply was quicker than my thoughts, and I might think and think now when it was too late, for I had kissed her on the mouth. That evening I took my usual walk in Washington Park, pondering over the occurrences of the day. I was thoroughly committed. There was no back out now, and I stared the future straight in the face. It was not good, not even scrupulous, but I had no idea of deceiving either myself or Tessie. The one passion of my life lay buried in the sunlit forests of Brittany. Was it buried forever? Hope cried no. For 3 years I had been listening to the voice of hope, and for 3 years I had waited for a footstep on my threshold. Had Sylvia forgotten? No, cried hope. I said that I was not good. That is true, but still I was not exactly a comic opera villain. I led an easy-going, reckless life, taking what invited me of pleasure, deploring and sometimes bitterly regretting consequences. In one thing alone, except my painting, was I serious, and that was something which lay hidden, if not lost, in the Breton forests. It was too late now for me to regret what had occurred during the day, whatever it had been, pity, a sudden tenderness for sorrow, or the more brutal instinct of gratified vanity. It was all the same now. And unless I wished to bruise an innocent heart, my path lay marked before me. The fire and strength, the depth of passion of a love which I had never even suspected, with all my imagined experience in the world, left me no alternative but to respond, or send her away. Whether because I'm so cowardly about giving pain to others, or whether it was that I have little of the gloomy Puritan in me, I don't know, but I shrank from disclaiming responsibility for that thoughtless kiss, and in fact had no time to do so before the gates of her heart opened and the flood poured forth. Others who habitually do their duty and find a sullen satisfaction in making themselves and everybody else unhappy might have withstood it. I did not. I dared not. After the storm had abated, I did tell her that she might better have loved Ed Burke and worn a plain gold ring, but she wouldn't hear of it. And I thought, perhaps, that as long as she had decided to love somebody she could not marry, it had better be me. I at least could treat her with an intelligent affection, and whenever she became tired of her infatuation, she could go none the worse for it. For I was decided on that point, although I knew how hard that would be. I remember the usual termination of platonic liaisons and thought how disgusted I had been whenever I heard of one. I knew I was undertaking a great deal for so unscrupulous a man as I was, and I dreaded the future, but never for one moment did I doubt that she was safe with me. Had it been anybody but Tessie, I shouldn't have bothered my head about scruples, for it did not occur to me to sacrifice Tessie as I would have sacrificed a woman of the world. I looked at the future squarely in the face and saw the several probable endings to the affair. She would either tire of the whole thing, or become so unhappy that I should have either to marry her or go away. If I married her, we would be unhappy. I with a wife unsuited to me, and she with a husband unsuitable for any woman. For my past life could scarcely entitle me to marry. If I went away, she might either fall ill, recover, and marry some Eddie Burke, or she might recklessly and deliberately go and do something foolish. On the other hand, if she tired of me, then her whole life would be before her with beautiful vistas of Eddie Burkes and marriage rings and twins and Harlem flats and heaven knows what. As I strolled along through the trees by the Washington Arch, I decided that she should find a substantial friend in me anyway, and the future could take care of itself. Then I went into the house and put on my evening dress for the little faintly perfumed note, and my dresser said, "Have a cab at the stage door at 11, and the note was signed, Edith Carmichael, Metropolitan Theatre. I took supper that night, or rather we took supper, Miss Carmichael and I, at Solari's, and the dawn was just beginning to gild the cross on the Memorial Church as I entered Washington Square after leaving Edith at the Brunswick. There was not a soul in the park as I passed among the trees and took the walk which leads from the Garibaldi statue to the Hamilton apartment house. But as I passed the churchyard, I saw a figure sitting on the stone steps. In spite of myself, a chill crept over me at the sight of the puffy white face, and I hastened to pass. Then he said something which might have been addressed to me, or might merely have been a mutter to himself, but a sudden furious anger flamed up within me that such a creature should address me. For an instant I felt like wheeling about and smashing my stick over his head, but I walked on, and entering the Hamilton, went to my apartment. For some time I tossed about the bed trying to get the sound of his voice out of my ears, but I could not. It filled my head, that muttering sound, like thick oily smoke from a fat rendering vat, or an odour of noisome decay. And as I lay and tossed about, the voice in my ears seemed more distinct, and I began to understand the words he had muttered. They came to me slowly, as if I had forgotten them, and at last I could make some sense out of the sounds. It was this:
"Have you found the yellow sign? Have you found the yellow sign? Have you found the yellow sign?"
I was furious. What did he mean by that? Then, with a curse upon him and his, I rolled over and went to sleep. But when I woke later, I looked pale and haggard, for I had dreamed the dream of the night before, and it troubled me more than I cared to think. I dressed and went down into my studio. Tessie sat by the window, but as I came in, she rose and put both arms around my neck for an innocent kiss. She looked so sweet and dainty that I kissed her again, and then sat down before the easel. "Hello, where's the study I began yesterday?" I asked. Tessie looked conscious but didn't answer. I began to hunt among the pile of canvases, saying, "Hurry up, Tess, and get ready. We must take advantage of the morning light." When at last I gave up the search among the other canvases and turned to look around the room for the missing study, I noticed Tessie standing by the screen, with her clothes still on. "Well, what's the matter?" I asked. "Don't you feel well?" "Yes." "Then hurry. Do you want me to pose as I've always posed?" Then I understood. Here was a new complication. I had lost, of course, the best nude model I had ever seen. I looked at Tessie. Her face was scarlet. Alas, alas, we had eaten of the tree of knowledge, and Eden and native innocence were dreams of the past. I mean, for her. I suppose she noticed the disappointment on my face, for she said, "I'll pose if you wish. The study is behind the screen here where I put it." "No," I said, "we'll begin something new." And I went into my wardrobe and picked out a Moorish costume, which fairly blazed with tinsel. It was a genuine costume, and Tessie retired to the screen with it enchanted. When she came forth again, I was astonished. Her long black hair was bound above her forehead with a circlet of turquoises, and the ends curled about her glittering girdle. Her feet were encased in the embroidered pointed slippers, and the skirt of her costume, curiously wrought with arabesques in silver, fell to her ankles. And the short Moresque jacket, spangled and sewn with turquoises, became her wonderfully. She came up to me and held up her face smiling. I slipped my hand into my pocket and, drawing out a gold chain with a cross attached, dropped it over her head. "It's yours, Tessie." "Mine?" she faltered. Yours. Now go and pose. Then, with a radiant smile, she ran behind the screen and presently reappeared with a little box on which was written my name. I had intended to give it to you when I went home tonight, she said, but I can't wait now. I opened the box. On the pink cotton inside lay a clasp of black onyx, on which was inlaid a curious symbol or letter in gold. It was neither Arabic nor Chinese, nor, as I found out afterwards, did it belong to any human script. It's all I had to give you for a keepsake, she said timidly. I was annoyed, but I told her how much I should prize it and promised to wear it always. She fastened it on my coat beneath the lapel. How foolish, Tess, to go and buy me such a beautiful thing as this, I said. I didn't buy it, she laughed. Where did you get it? Then she told me how she'd found it one day while coming from the aquarium in the Battery, how she'd advertised it and watched the papers, but at last gave up all hope of finding the owner. That was last winter, she said. The very day I had the first horrid dream about the hearse. I remembered my dream of the previous night, but said nothing. And presently my charcoal was flying over a new canvas, and Tessie stood motionless on the model stand. 3. The day following was a disastrous one for me. While moving a framed canvas from one easel to another, my foot slipped on the polished floor, and I fell heavily on both wrists. They were so badly sprained that it was useless to attempt to hold a brush, and I was obliged to wander about the studio, glaring at unfinished drawings and sketches, until despair seized me and I sat down to smoke and twiddle my thumbs with rage. The rain blew against the windows and rattled on the roof of the church, driving me into a nervous fit with its interminable patter. Tessie sat sewing by the window, and every now and then raised her head and looked at me with such innocent compassion that I began to feel ashamed of my irritation and looked about for something to occupy me. I had read all the papers and all the books in the library, but for the sake of something to do, I went to the bookcases and shoved them open with my elbow. I knew every volume by its color and examined them all, passing slowly round the library and whistling to keep up my spirits. I was turning to go into the dining room when my eye fell upon a book bound in serpent skin, standing in the corner of the top shelf of the last bookcase. I did not remember it, and from the floor couldn't decipher the pale lettering on the back, so I went into the smoking room and called Tessie. She came in from the studio and climbed up to reach the book. "What is it?" I asked. The King in Yellow." I was dumbfounded. Who had placed it there? How came it into my rooms? I had long ago decided that I should never open that book, and nothing on earth could have persuaded me to buy it. Fearful lest curiosity might tempt me to open it, I had never even looked at it in any bookstores. I had never even had any curiosity to read it, the awful tragedy of the young Castaigne, whom I knew prevented me from exploring its wicked pages. I had always refused to listen to any description of it, and indeed, nobody ever ventured to discuss the second part aloud, so I had absolutely no knowledge of what those leaves might reveal. I stared at the poisonous mottled binding as I would at a snake. "Don't touch it, Tessie," I said. "Come down." Of course, my admonition was enough to arouse her curiosity, and before I could prevent it, she took the book and, laughing, danced off into the studio with it. I called to her, but she slipped away with a tormenting smile at my helpless hands, and I followed her with some impatience. "Tessie," I cried, entering the library. "Listen, I'm serious. Put that book away. I do not wish you to open it." The library was empty. I went into both drawing rooms, then into the bedrooms, laundry, kitchen, and finally returned to the library and began a systematic search. She had hidden herself so well it was half an hour later when I discovered her crouching, white and silent, by the latticed window in the storeroom above. At the first glance I saw that she had been punished for her foolishness. The King in Yellow lay at her feet, but the book was open at the second part. I looked at Tessie and saw it was too late. She had opened The King in Yellow. Then I took her by the hand and led her into the studio. She seemed dazed, and when I told her to lie down on the sofa, she obeyed me without a word. After a while she closed her eyes and her breathing became irregular and deep, but I could not determine whether or not she slept. For a long while I sat silently beside her, but she neither stirred nor spoke, and at last I rose and entering the unused storeroom, took the book in my least injured hand. It seemed heavy as lead, but I carried it into the studio again, and sitting down on the rug beside the sofa, opened it and read it through, from beginning to end. When, faint with the excess of my emotions, I dropped the volume and leaned wearily back against the sofa, Tessie opened her eyes and looked at me. We had been speaking for some time in a dull, monotonous strain before I realized that we were discussing the King in Yellow. Oh, the sin of writing such words, words which are as clear as crystal, limpid and musical as bubbling springs, words which sparkle and glow like the poisoned diamonds of the Medicis. Oh, the wickedness, the hopeless damnation of a soul who could fascinate and paralyze human creatures with such words. Words understood by the ignorant and wise alike, words which are more precious than jewels, more soothing than music, more awful than death. We talked on, unmindful of the gathering shadows, and she was begging me to throw away the clasp of black onyx, quaintly inlaid with what we now knew to be the yellow sign. I never shall know why I refused, even though at this hour, here in my bedroom as I write this confession, I should be glad to know what it was that prevented me from tearing the yellow sign from my breast and casting it into the fire. I am sure I wished to do so, and yet Tessie pleaded with me in vain. Night fell, and the hours dragged on, but still we murmured to each other of the king and the pallid mask. And midnight sounded from the misty spires in the fog-wrapped city. We spoke of Hastur and of Casilda, while outside the fog rolled against the black window panes as the cloud waves roll and break on the shores of hell. The house was very silent now, and not a sound came up from the misty streets. Tessie lay among the cushions, her face a grey blot in the gloom, but her hands were clasped in mine, and I knew that she knew and read my thoughts as I read hers, for we had understood the mystery of the Hyades, and the phantom of truth was laid. Then, as we answered each other, swiftly, silently, thought on thought, the shadows stirred in the gloom about us, and far in the distant streets we heard a sound. Nearer and nearer it came, the dull crunching of the wheels, nearer and yet nearer, and now, outside, before the door, it ceased, and I dragged myself to the window and saw a black-plumed hearse. The gate below opened and shut, and I crept, shaking, to my door and bolted it. But I knew no bolts, no locks, could keep that creature out, who was coming for the yellow sign. And now I heard him moving very softly along the hall. Now he was at the door, and the bolts rotted at his touch. Now he had entered. With eyes starting from my head, I peered into the darkness, but when he came into the room, I did not see him. It was only when I felt him envelop me in his cold, soft grasp that I cried out and struggled with deadly fury, but my hands were useless, and he tore the onyx clasp from my coat and struck me full in the face. Then, as I fell, I heard Tessie's soft cry, and her spirit fled, and even while falling, I longed to follow her, for I knew that the King in Yellow had opened his tattered mantle, and there was only God to cry to now. I could tell more, but I cannot see what help it will be to the world. As for me, I am past human help or hope. As I lie here, writing, careless even whether or not I die before I finish, I can see the doctor gathering up his powders and phials with a vague gesture.
I, Luc de Chaudronnier, sometime known as astrologer and sorcerer, write this account of the true origin and slaying of the beast of Averoigne. And when I have ended, the writing shall be sealed in a brazen box, and the box be set in a secret chamber of my house at Zim, so that no man shall learn the verity of this matter till many years and decades have gone by. Indeed, it were not well for such evil prodigies to be divulged, while any who took part in them are still on the earthward side of purgatory. And at present the truth is known only to me, and to certain others who are sworn to maintain secrecy. As all men know, the advent of the beast was coeval with the coming of that red comet which rose behind the dragon in the early summer of 1369. Like Satan's rutilant hair trailing on the wind of Gehenna as he hastens worldward, the comet streamed nightly above Averoigne, bringing the fear of bale and pestilence in its train. And soon the rumour of a strange evil, a foulness unheard of in any legend, passed among the people. To Brother Jerome of the Benedictine Abbey of Périgord, it was given to behold this evil ere the horror thereof became manifest to others. Returning late to the monastery from an errand in St. Zénobie, Jerome was overtaken by darkness. No moon arose to lantern his way through the forest, but between the gnarled boughs of antique oaks he saw the vengefully streaming fire of the comet, which seemed to pursue him as he went. And Jerome felt an eerie fear of the pit-deep shadows, and he made haste towards the abbey postern. Passing among the ancient trees that towered thickly behind Périgord, he thought that he discerned a light from the windows, and was much cheered thereby. But going on, he saw that the light was near at hand, beneath a lowering bough. It moved as with the flitting of a fen fire, and was of changeable colour, being pale as a corposant, or ruddy as new-spilled blood, or green as the poisonous distillation that surrounds the moon. Then, with terror ineffable, Jerome beheld the thing to which the light clung like a hellish nimbus, moving as it moved, and revealing dimly the black abomination of head and limbs that were not those of any creature wrought by God. The horror stood erect, rising to more than the height of a tall man, and it swayed like a great serpent, and its members undulated, bending like heated wax. The flat black head was thrust forward on a snakish neck. The eyes, small and lidless, glowing like coals from a wizard's brazier, were set low and near together in a noseless face, above the serrate gleaming of such teeth as might belong to a giant bat. This much and no more Jerome saw ere the thing went past him, with its nimbus flaring from venomous green to a wrathful red. Of its actual shape and the number of its limbs he could form no just notion. Running and slithering rapidly, it disappeared among the antique oaks, and he saw the hellish light no more. Nigh dead with fear, Jerome reached the abbey postern and sought admittance. And the porter, hearing the tale of that which he had met in the moonless wood, forbore to chide him for his tardiness. Before nones, on the morrow, a dead stag was found in the forest behind Périgord. It had been slain in some ungodly fashion, not by wolf or poacher or hunter. It was unmarked by any wound, other than a wide gash that had laid open the spine from neck to tail. The spine itself had been shattered, and the white marrow sucked therefrom, but no other portion had been devoured. None could surmise the nature of the beast that slew and ravened in such fashion. But the good brothers, heedful of the story told by Jerome, believed that some creature from the pit was abroad in Averoigne. And Jerome marvelled at the mercy of God, which had permitted him to escape the doom of the stag. Now, night by night, the comet greatened, burning like an evil mist of blood and fire, while the stars blenched before it. And day by day, from peasants, priests, woodcutters, and others who came to the abbey, the Benedictines heard tales of fearsome and mysterious depredations. Dead wolves were found with their chines laid open and the white marrow gone, and an ox and a horse were treated in like fashion. Then, it seemed, the unknown beast grew bolder, or else it wearied of such humble prey as the creatures of farm and forest. At first it did not strike at living men, but assailed the dead, like some foul eater of carrion. 2 freshly buried corpses were found lying in the cemetery at St. Zénobie, where the thing had dug them from their graves and had bared their vertebrae. In each case, only a little of the marrow had been eaten, but, as if in rage or disappointment, the cadavers had been torn asunder, and the tatters of their flesh were mixed with the rags of their cerements. From this, it would seem that only the spinal marrow of creatures newly killed was pleasing to the monster. Thereafterward, the dead were not again molested, but on the night following the desecration of the graves, 2 charcoal burners who plied their trade in the forest not far from Périgord were slain in their hut. Other charcoal burners dwelling nearby heard the shrill screams that fell to sudden silence, and peering fearfully through the chinks of their bolted doors, they saw anon in the starlight the departure of a black, obscenely glowing shape that issued from the hut. Not till dawn did they dare to verify the fate of their fellows, who had been served in the same manner as the stag, the wolves, and the corpses. Théophile, the abbot of Périgord, was much exercised over this evil that had chosen to manifest itself in the neighbourhood, and whose depredations were all committed within a few hours' journey of the abbey. Pale from over-strict austerities and vigils, he called the monks before him in assembly, and a martial ardour against the minions of Asmodai blazed in his hollowed eyes as he spoke. "Truly," he said, "there is a great devil among us that has risen with the comet from Malebolge. We, the brothers of Périgord, must go forth with cross and holy water to hunt the devil in its hidden lair, which lies haply at our very portals." So, on the forenoon of that same day, Théophile, together with Jerome and 6 others chosen for their hardihood, sallied forth and made search of the forest for miles around. They entered with lit torches and lifted crosses the deep caves to which they came, but found no fiercer thing than wolf or badger. Also they searched the crumbling vaults of the deserted castle of Fausse-Flamme, which was said to be haunted by vampires, but nowhere could they trace the monster or find any sign of its lairing. With nightly deeds of terror beneath the comet's blasting, the middle summer went by. Men, women, children, to the number of more than 40, were done to death by the beast, which, though seeming to haunt mainly the environs of the abbey, ranged afield at times even to the shores of the river Isoile and the gates of La Fresnaye and Zime. There were those who beheld it by night, a black and slithering foulness clad in changeable luminescence, but no man saw it by day. And always the thing was silent, uttering no sound, and was swifter in its motion than the weaving viper. Once it was seen by moonlight in the abbey garden as it glided toward the forest between rows of peas and turnips. Then, coming in darkness, it struck within the walls. Without waking the others, on whom it must have cast a Lethean spell, it took brother Jerome slumbering on his pallet at the end of the row in the dormitory. And the fell deed was not discovered till daybreak, when the monk who slept nearest to Jerome awakened and saw his body, which lay face downward with the back of the robe and the flesh beneath in bloody tatters. A week later, it came and dealt likewise with brother Augustine, and in spite of exorcisms and the sprinkling of holy water at all doors and windows, it was seen afterward gliding along the monastery halls, and it left an unspeakably blasphemous sign of its presence in the chapel. Many believed that it menaced the abbot himself, for brother Constantine the cellarer returning late from a visit to Villon, saw it by starlight as it climbed the outer wall toward that window of Theophile's cell which faced the great forest. And seeing Constantine, the thing dropped to the ground like a huge ape and vanished among the trees. Great was the scandal of these happenings and the consternation of the monks. Sorely, it was said, the matter preyed on the abbot who kept his cell in unremitting prayer and vigil. Pale and meagre as a dying saint he grew, mortifying the flesh till he tottered with weakness, and a feverish illness devoured him visibly. More and more, apart from this haunting of the monastery, the horror fared afield, even invading walled towns. Toward the middle of August, when the comet was beginning to decline a little, there occurred the grievous death of Sister Thérèse, the young and beloved niece of Theophile, killed by the hellish beast in her cell at the Benedictine coven of Zeme. On this occasion, the monster was met by late passers in the streets, and others watched it climb the city ramparts, running like some enormous beetle or spider on the sheer stone as it fled from Zeme to regain its hidden lair. In her dead hands, it was told, the pious Thérèse held tightly clasped a letter from Theophile, in which he had spoken at some length of the dire happenings at the monastery, and had confessed his grief and despair at being unable to cope with the satanic horror. All this, in the course of the summer, came to me in my house at Zeme. From the beginning, because of my commerce with occult things and the powers of darkness, the unknown beast was the subject of my concern. I knew that it was no creature of earth or of the terrene hells, but regarding its actual character and genesis, I could learn no more at first than any other. Vainly I consulted the stars and made use of geomancy and necromancy, and the familiars whom I interrogated professed themselves ignorant, saying that the beast was altogether alien and beyond the ken of sublunar spirits. Then I bethought me of that strange oracular ring which I had inherited from my fathers, who were also wizards. The ring had come down from ancient Hyperborea, and had once been the property of the sorcerer Ibon. It was made of a redder gold than any that the earth had yielded in latter cycles, and was set with a large purple gem, sombre and smouldering, whose like is no longer to be found. In the gem, an antique demon was held captive, a spirit from pre-human worlds, which would answer the interrogation of sorcerers. So, from a rarely opened casket, I brought out the ring and made such preparations as were needful for the questioning. And when the purple stone was held inverted above a small brazier filled with hotly burning amber, the demon made answer, speaking in a shrill voice that was like the singing of fire. It told me the origin of the beast, which had come from the red comet, and belonged to a race of stellar devils that had not visited the earth since the foundering of Atlantis, and it told me the attributes of the beast, which in its own proper form was invisible and intangible to men, and could manifest itself only in a fashion supremely abominable. Moreover, it informed me of the one method by which the beast could be vanquished if overtaken in a tangible shape. Even to me, the student of darkness, these revelations were a source of horror and surprise, and for many reasons I deemed the mode of exorcism a doubtful and perilous thing. But the demon had sworn that there was no other way. Musing on that which I had learned, I waited among my books and alembics, for the stars had warned me that my intervention would be required in good time. To me, following the death of Sister Thérèse, there came privily the Marshal of Zim, together with the Abbot Theophile, in whose worn features and bowed form I descried the ravages of mortal sorrow and horror and humiliation. And the two, albeit with palpable hesitancy, asked my advice and assistance in the laying of the beast. "You, Monsieur le Chaudronnier," said the Marshal, "are reputed to know the arcanic arts of sorcery and the spells which summon and dismiss demons. Therefore, in dealing with this devil, it may be that you shall succeed where all others have failed. Not willingly do we employ you in the matter, since it is not seemly for the Church and the law to ally themselves with wizardry. But the need is desperate, lest the demon should take other victims. In return for your aid, we can promise you a goodly reward of gold and a guarantee of lifelong immunity from all inquisition which your doings might otherwise invite. The Bishop of Zim and the Archbishop of Villon are privy to this offer, which must be kept secret." "I ask no reward," I replied, "if it be in my power to rid Averoigne of this scourge. But you have set me a difficult task, and one that is happily attended by strange perils." "All assistance that can be given you shall be yours to command," said the Marshal. "Men at arms shall attend you, if need be." Then Theophile, speaking in a low, broken voice, assured me that all doors, including those of the Abbey of Périgord, would be opened at my request, and that everything possible would be done to further the laying of the fiend. I reflected briefly and said, "Go now, but send to me an hour before sunset 2 men-at-arms mounted and with a 3rd steed, and let the men be chosen for their valour and discretion. For this very night I shall visit Périgord, where the horror seems to centre." Remembering the advice of the gem-imprisoned demon, I made no preparation for the journey except to place upon my index finger the ring of Ibon, and to arm myself with a small hammer, which I placed at my girdle in lieu of a sword. Then I awaited the set hour when the men and the horses came to my house, as had been stipulated. The men were stout and tested warriors, clad in chainmail and carrying swords and halberds. I mounted the 3rd horse, a black and spirited mare, and we rode forth from Zim towards Périgord, taking a direct and little-used way, which ran through the werewolf-haunted forest. My companions were taciturn, speaking only in answer to some question, and then briefly. This pleased me, for I knew they would maintain a discreet silence regarding that which might occur before dawn. Swiftly we rode, while the sun sank in a redness as of welling blood among the tall trees, and soon the darkness wove its thickening webs from bough to bough, closing upon us like some inexorable net of evil. Deeper we went into the brooding woods, and even I, the master of sorceries, trembled a little at the knowledge of all that was abroad in the darkness. Undelayed and unmolested, however, we came to the abbey at late moonrise, when all the monks except the aged porter had retired to their dormitory. The abbot, returning at sunset from Zim, had given word to the porter of our coming, and he would have admitted us, but this, as it happened, was no part of my plan. Saying I had reason to believe the beast would re-enter the abbey that very night, I told the porter of my intention of waiting outside the walls to intercept it, and merely asked him to accompany us in a tour of the building's exterior so that he could point out the various rooms. This he did, and during the tour he indicated a certain window in the 2nd story as being that of Theophile's cell. The window faced the forest, and I remarked the abbot's rashness in leaving it open. This, the porter told me, was his invariable custom, in spite of the oft-repeated demoniac invasions of the monastery. Behind the window, we saw the glimmering of a taper, as if the abbot were keeping late vigil. We had committed our horses to the porter's care. After he had conducted us around the building and had left us, we returned to the space before Theophile's window and began our long watch. Pale and hollow as the face of a corpse, the moon rose higher, swimming above the sombre oaks and pouring a spectral silver on the grey stone of the abbey walls. In the west, the comet flamed among the lustreless signs, veiling the lifted sting of the scorpion as it sank. We waited hour by hour in the shortening shadow of a tall oak where none could see us from the windows. When the moon had passed over, sloping westward, the shadow began to lengthen toward the wall. All was mortally still, and we saw no movement apart from the slow shifting of the light and shade. Halfway between midnight and dawn, the taper went out in Theophile's cell, as if it had burned to the socket, and thereafter the room remained dark. Unquestioning, with ready weapons, the men at arms companioned me in that vigil. Well they knew the demonian terror which they might face before dawn, but there was no trepidation in their bearing. And knowing much that they could not know, I drew the ring of Ibon from my finger and made ready for that which the demon had directed me to do. The men stood nearer than I to the forest, facing it perpetually according to a strict order that I had given. But nothing stirred in the fretted gloom, and the slow night ebbed, and the skies grew paler as if with morning twilight. Then, an hour before sunrise, when the shadow of the great oak had reached the wall and was climbing towards Theophile's window, there came the thing I had anticipated. Very suddenly it came, and without forewarning of its nearness, a horror of hellish red light, swift as a kindling, wind-blown flame that leapt from the forest gloom and sprang upon us where we stood stiff and weary from our night-long vigil. One of the men-at-arms was borne to the ground, and I saw above him, in a floating redness as of ghostly blood, the black and semi-serpentine form of the beast. A flat and snakish head, without ears or nose, was tearing at the man's armour with sharp, serrate teeth, and I heard the teeth clash and grate on the linked iron. Swiftly I laid the ring of Ibon on a stone I had placed in readiness and broke the dark jewel with a blow of the hammer that I carried. From the pieces of the lightly shattered gem, the disimprisoned demon rose in the form of a smoky fire, small as a candle flame at first, and grating like the conflagration of piled faggots, and hissing softly with the voice of fire, and brightening to a wrathful, terrible gold. The demon leapt forward to do battle with the beast, even as it had promised me, in return for its freedom after cycles of captivity. It closed upon the beast with a vengeful flaring, tall as the flame of an auto-da-fe, and the beast relinquished the man-at-arms on the ground beneath it, and writhed back like a burnt serpent. The body and members of the beast were loathfully convulsed, and they seemed to melt in the manner of wax, and to change dimly and horribly beneath the flame, undergoing an incredible metamorphosis. Moment by moment, like a werewolf that returns from its beasthood, the thing took on the wavering similitude of man. The unclean blackness flowed and swirled, assuming the weft of cloth amid its changes, and becoming the folds of a dark robe and cowl, such as are worn by the Benedictines. Then, from the cowl, a face began to peer, and the face though shadowy and distorted, was that of the abbot Theophile. This prodigy I beheld for an instant, and the men also beheld it. But still the fire-shaped demon assailed the abhorrently transfigured thing, and the face melted again into waxy blackness, and a great column of sooty smoke arose, followed by an odour as of burning flesh commingled with some mighty foulness. And out of the volumed smoke, above the hissing of the demon, there came a single cry in the voice of Theophile. But the smoke thickened, hiding both the assailant and that which it assailed, and there was no sound other than the singing of fed fire. At last the sable fumes began to lift, ascending and disappearing amid the boughs, and the dancing golden light, in the shape of a will-o'-the-wisp, went soaring over the dark trees towards the stars. And I knew that the demon of the ring had fulfilled its promise, and had now gone back to those remote and ultra-mundane deeps from which the sorcerer Ibon had drawn it down in Hyperborea to become the captive of the purple gem. The stench of burning passed from the air, together with the mighty foulness, and of that which had been the beast there was no longer any trace. So I knew that the horror born of the red comet had been driven away by the fiery demon. The fallen man-at-arms had risen unharmed beneath his mail, and he and his fellows stood beside me, saying naught. But I knew that they had seen the changes of the beast, and had divined something of the truth. So while the moon grew grey with the nearness of dawn, I made them swear an awful oath of secrecy, and enjoined them to bear witness to the statement I must make before the monks of Périgord. Then, having settled this matter so that the good renown of the holy Theophile should suffer no calumny, we aroused the porter. We averred that the beast had come upon us unaware, and had gained the abbot's cell before we could prevent it, and had come forth again, carrying Theophile with its snakish members, as if to bear him away to the sunken comet. I had exorcised the unclean devil, which had vanished in a cloud of sulphurous fire and vapour, and, most unluckily, the abbot had been consumed by the fire. His death, I said, was a true martyrdom, and would not be in vain. The beast would no longer plague the country or bedevil Périgord, since the exorcism I had used was infallible. This tale was accepted without question by the brothers, who grieved mightily for their good abbot. Indeed, the tale was true enough, for Theophile had been innocent, and was wholly ignorant of the foul change that came upon him nightly in his cell, and the deeds that were done by the beast through his loathfully transfigured body. Each night the thing had come down from the passing comet to assuage its hellish hunger, and being otherwise impalpable and powerless, it had used the abbot for its energumen, moulding his flesh in the image of some obscene monster from beyond the stars. It had slain a peasant girl in Saint Zenobie on that night while we waited behind the abbey. But thereafter the beast was seen no more in Averoigne, and its murderous deeds were not repeated. In time the comet passed to other heavens, fading slowly, and the black terror it had wrought became a varying legend, even as all other bygone things. The abbot Theophile was canonized for his strange martyrdom, and they who read this record in future ages will believe it not, saying that no demon or malign spirit could have prevailed thus upon true holiness. Indeed, it were well that none should believe the story, for thin is the veil betwixt man and the godless deep. The skies are haunted by that which it were madness to know, and strange abominations pass evermore between earth and moon and athwart the galaxies. Unnameable things have come to us in alien horror, and will come again. And the evil of the stars is not as the evil of earth. The Mask of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress to the sudden impulses of despair or of frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dances, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first, let me tell of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here, the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and at each turn a novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass, whose colour varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. Then, at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet. The 7th apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, folding in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the colour of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood colour. Now, in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum. Amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof, there was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers. But in the corridors that followed the suite there stood, opposite to each window, a heavy tripod, bearing a brazier of fire that projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illumined the room. And thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. It was in this apartment also that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when the minute hand made the circuit of the face and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that at the lapse of an hour the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance to hearken to the sound, and thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company, and while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as if in confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled, as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows each to the other that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embrace 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then, with the same disconcert and tremulousness and meditation as before. But in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colours and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric lustre. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. He had directed in great part the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers upon occasion of this great fete, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm, much of which has since been seen in Hernani. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies such as the madman fashions. There was much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked in fact a multitude of dreams, and these, the dreams, writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And anon there strikes the ebony clock which stands in the hall of the velvet, and then for a moment all is still, and all is silent save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live, and writhe to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many-tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the 7, there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-coloured panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls. And to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ears who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went whirlingly on. until at length there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock, and then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps, that more of thought crept with more of time into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who revelled, and thus too it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before, and the rumour of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz or murmur, expressive of disapprobation and surprise, then finally of terror, of horror, and of disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion, even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests. There are matters of which no jest can be made. The whole company indeed seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat, and yet all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revellers around. But the mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral image, which, with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed, in the first moment with a strong shudder either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him, "who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements." It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were found none who would put forth hand to seize him, so that unimpeded he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centres of the rooms to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him, on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped, gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterwards fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revellers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask which they handled with so violent rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revellers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall, and the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay, and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that